Welcome back, baseball fans, to another elimination video. Today we're eliminating the Toronto Blue Jays. Another incredible season. Unfortunately, they just had some slumps and just did not get enough close victories for a team. A year ago, they were 26-19, made the playoffs. This year, 18-19. Last year, they gave up more runs than they scored. This year, they scored more runs than they gave up. Their batting average is a little bit better. The ERA was a little bit better, but it didn't translate into wins and losses. It just, the Cinderella clock strikes midnight just kind of catches up with you over a period of 2 years. Actually, you added up the record. You've got a team that would be 45-38 right now if we were into a 162 game season. And that would be extremely respectable for a team that doesn't possess a lot of talent, obviously. They didn't exist in this timeline, so they just got leftovers from other teams. But what a diverse group. And what's some interesting eye-popping stats. I mean, at the top of the bottom of the hitting range here, it's really just Ed Kranepool, 388 and 134 at-bats. No home runs for a first baseman. Drove in 24 runs in 37 games, though, with a 388 average. Jerry Hairston, 344. Mike Lum, the All-Star, hits at 342 and 324 the last few years. And Monzon and Milt May. And it drifts down, and then you're starting to see how deep the drifting down goes. You've got 4 guys in the Mendoza line there. Brazil was this power-hitting third baseman, 10 homers, led the club with 30 RBIs, but only at 206. And then you have the guys, unfortunately, Tommy A.G. hitting a $169, Cleon Jones 232. I hate to see that. They're near the end of their careers. Pitching, Rorik Harrison underused out of the bullpen because the starting pitching was so solid, frankly. 3.30 ERA. All the starters did well. Unfortunately, at the very bottom there, Eddie Bain just pitching some really bad luck. Didn't pitch well as well. 0-4. Lost the 5th game. Probably could have used a different choice for pitcher in the deciding game. But then, Eddie Bain's replacing Joe Grisenda, who was the lefty closer a year ago. I mean, the problem is that Toronto has to thread a needle for perfection, literally, in finding enough good players. And most of the time, they have made outstanding choices, like Jerry Royce, like Carl Morton, Clyde Wright, Doyle Alexander they got because he will be a Blue Jay later in the decade. So, all in all, it's been 2 fantastic years, and if they go 18-19, hey, that's great. Compared to some of the traditional teams in this timeline that have struggled, such as the LA Dodgers, the Houston Astros, California Angels, Minnesota Twins, these are all traditional teams who perform much worse than this Toronto team has. So, with that, let's take a look at the Blue Jays who are coming back next year. Can they put 3 successful seasons together by finding guys off the scrap heap? Well, one thing is they won the Commissioner Award a few years ago, and that compensation pick for winning Commissioner Award turned out to be Jerry Royce. They don't have that luxury anymore. So they've used up all their good fortune in drafting and free agency and their shrewdness. Eventually, teams are going to start being wary of making trades with Toronto. They're a very smart, shrewd team, and don't deal with the Blue Jays. They'll rip you off in a trade, apparently. Jerry Hairston, that's a fine player to be a platoon DH, the top lineup with on base, platooning with this guy. Carl Taylor over here. So, yeah, you want a pair of guys to get on versus lefties or righties, you got it guaranteed right there. Milt May, solid catcher. Had to leave Pittsburgh because of Sanguian. There was no work. He would go to Houston, and Houston still has Johnny Edwards in our league. And so he says, well, I need to go find some work. Let me go to Toronto. And here's the Kranepool card. So, I mean, it's not a fluke at all. The dude hit 323. He's only batting over there, even though it's 15% up there. And, yeah, he had 388 with this card. Daryl Chaney, this is a surprisingly effective card. You get full-time power to left-handed infielder, who's a 3 at all the positions, plus the walks. So even though it's a 200 batting average, it's an effective 200 for our league. He doesn't need to be an extra day player. He could just be a utility player at various spots. So flexibility is what these expansion teams need. Cleon Jones, this will be a fine left fielder. He underachieved. Maybe he'll overachieve next year. Who knows? He had 1 homer and 17 RBIs and 142 at-bats at 232 with this card. So there's reason to suggest, well, maybe it was a slump, and maybe next year will be better, because it's supposed to hit 282. Tommy A.G., on the other hand, this is a 222 hitting card. As you can see, better against righties. He's really bad over here. And this is a 222 Cardinal card. Hit 169 with it. And here's the Toronto Star. This is going to be 3 years we played with this card of Lum, and he hit over 300 every year with it. Not a surprise either. Look at the stats. 73 Braves. Everybody hit 290, it seemed. Actually, he's the 5th best hitter on that squad. He's got the 5th template, 5th batting average. But this team also, Atlanta also had the 3 guys with the 40 home runs. It had the extra players, Dick Dietz and Chuck Goggin, who were incredible. So Atlanta was incredibly deep hitting in 1973. They could afford to lose a Mike Lum. That's 8 hitters. And the 4 pitchers, yeah, here's a gold. So the Pirates, you know, they had Jim Rooker and they promoted John Candelaria. They had Ramon Hernandez in the bullpen. They had no room for Jerry Royce, who was passing through anyway. He previously played for, I believe, may have played for Houston and St. Louis. I'm not sure, or one of those teams. He's not in Pittsburgh very long. He goes to the Dodgers later. But for now, the Blue Jays are going to make him a cornerstone. And this is Carl Morton, who had a fantastic year. Had at least 2 complete game shutouts. Shut out Texas in the series we just saw. He shut out Baltimore and beat Jim Palmer earlier this year. Here's the Eddie Bain card. He's Joe Grisenda was their closer and the only lefty in their bullpen. All they could find was Eddie Bain. He's decent against lefties, struggles against righties. Overall, it's, you know, if you use the card rightly, he should outperform the ERA there. But he'd be the weak link for the Blue Jay bullpen. Elias Sosa, he's the closer. Wasn't asked to be used much, underused closer. Had 2 saves and a 3.14 ERA. All in all, a very respectable bunch of cards. Not many clunkers in the bunch. So now the critical part is to see if any of those 8 players can continue their careers. If they're one-hit wonders, you're going to have to retire them all in one off season. That could be problematic. Let's see what Toronto can do with those 8 players, who they keep, waive, and retire. All right, baseball fans, we're going to take a peek at these 8 Blue Jay players, beginning with Jim Brazil. And this is a one-shot performance, and he shot it all right. He had 10 home runs this past season. He had 9 in his career in 4 years. 4-year carryover league. So that was pretty much, yeah, the performance you just saw in our league this past season. It was all from the 72 card. And frankly, that was a wonderful performance at age 22 for Jim. But he will have to be retired, as this is what happens to these teams. They get these guys you don't hear from very much. And you have to keep finding these guys, as they're usually the extra player card sets, the extra 4 cards each team gets. They're usually unprotected, but you get some great performances like Roger Freed comes to mind, Manny Mota comes to mind, Kurt Bavacqua has a 330 card that comes to mind. You can find these extra player cards with staggering stats. And it's not like it's going to tilt the scales to use these guys a lot, because these teams are so needy. It's not like you can find 20 versions of that same card. The next player is Tim Foley. He will stick around. Now, he had stops with the Expos and Pirates. Who else? The Angels, I believe. So Montreal, a year with the Giants and the Mets and the Pirates and the Angels and the Yankees and back to the Pirates. You see, when you get a guy who travels around a lot like this, that's a good candidate for an expansion team because no particular team misses him too much. It's not like, it's not like the Toronto Blue Jays are ever going to have Johnny Bench or Brooks Robinson or Hank Aaron on their team anytime soon. It's just not in the cards. We're not going to do anything as outlandish as that. So they got to find baseball players who travel around a lot and baseball players who have short careers and short sample sizes. Foley actually plays a decent chunk of his career in Montreal, probably the most years. The Expos might want to come calling for their shortstop, but his numbers are modest anyway, so I don't even know if the Expos really miss him. He has some full-time plate appearances here. He's known as a player who makes great contact. One year he had like 18 strikeouts. What was it? Was it this year? 23 strikeouts and 540 plate appearances. That was amazing. Or 79, actually, 14 strikeouts and 594 plate appearances. Wow. That's some incredible bat control there for Tim Foley. We played the 72 card at 241 as a 2. Frankly, you're going to just have to look at the defense because the batting average is about the same the whole time. They're going to keep him. They got to have a steady shortstop. And again, unless Montreal comes calling and you want to, if they want to overpay for Tim Foley, I guess they're welcome to do it. But I guess the Blue Jays just hold on to a solid shortstop, something they didn't have. So later in the decade, they had Alfredo Griffin. Eventually, they get Tony Fernandez. But we're a long way from that for the Blue Jays. Next player is Ted Ford. I believe he'll be another victim of this short career syndrome. Ted Ford played from 70 to 73. Has a few Strat-O-Matic cards, I think in 71 and 72. But in 73, they're not going to make that card in 40 at-bats for Cleveland. We can double check and see if the card exists. If the card exists, he can get waivers. One step prior to retirement. And it was with Cleveland. So does he have a 73 Cleveland card? This is the roster sheet for 73. We'll check Cleveland for Ted Ford. And if he doesn't exist, he'll have to be in retirement. Looking at their extra players down here, this is where you find your players for expansion teams. There's no Ted Ford, so he must be retired. Not a good start with 2 retirees already. We're still not even halfway through. The next one is Dan Monson. And, I just kind of remember the 73 set. Some of these names I know aren't going to be around. And the good part is the Strat-O-Matic printed these cards back in this era. Even a guy, they didn't know how long these guys' careers are going to be. Obviously, you can't predict the future. But the fact that the cards get printed, when they don't have to print these, it's good when you're building a league that has more teams than Major League Baseball had, and you're expanding it from 24 to 32 teams, and you find all these extra player cards. You want to look at them all and see if you can get your eyes on all these cards and see if you can get them into a league. So this is the card we played for 4 years, a 365 on-base middle infielder. He's got 89 plate appearances for the Twins in 73. Look for the Twins in the infield for Monson, and they didn't make that card. Probably a good thing. Statistically, his on-base dropped 40 points. Had a knack for drawing walks, though. Give him credit for that, even though his career ended at age 27. So Dan Monson's the 3rd retiree here now for the Toronto. And you're seeing these are the problems the expansion teams are going to have, For every Jim Brazil that, outwits the sample size to outperform his career statistics, you've got too many roster spots to fill. Now the pitching. Doyle Alexander. Well, I can actually put keeper right there. I know he pitches a long time. I mentioned guys who play for a lot of teams. It'd be nice if he had a Toronto hat on. He does. Well, that's nice. Yeah, Dodgers, Baltimore, New York, Texas, Atlanta, the Giants, the Yankees, then Toronto for a second time in 83. I thought he was with Toronto in 80. No, he's with Atlanta. Toronto there. And then in Detroit, he has a great year, I believe. 87 Tiger playoff team was 9-0 with a .153 earned run average. For fun, long career for a guy who might get lost a little bit. You know, he's not a Hall of Famer. He's a Hall of Very Gooder. Effective pitcher for a bunch of different teams. Never won 20 games. Had a good year in the strike year of 81 as well with the Giants. Yeah, this guy probably could write a book about all the different stops he had. What a fun career for Doyle Alexander. So, these are the years. Baltimore, that's a good start. And Baltimore, New York. Pitches on 3 days rest in 76, but split between the two teams. It would be nice if that card shows him pitching on 3 days rest, because it's the best whip here. But they get choices. That's the only choice for pitching a 3 days rest, though. The 76 season. And then not again until, well, he does it again in 77. So Alexander. All right. Next up is Clyde Wright. Getting close for Clyde. We're getting close to the end for him, but he's got, I think, 1 or 2 good ones left. He's here to 75. California had the lefty starters by this time. They had Andy Hassel, they had Frank Tanana. So he moves on to Milwaukee and Texas. But he's got 1 more year left in California. The ERA jumps a bit, as does the whip. But he's still pitching on 3 days rest, so he's a keeper. I mean, these guys are just going to start getting mediocre, and that's just the way it is. You can't expect Toronto just to keep building on top of these same cards and continuing to flirt for the playoffs. You're just going to have to find new players, again, left behind, and swoop in and land them before the other expansion teams get them. That's it. You know, there's 8. It'd be one thing if Toronto was like 1 or 2 expansion teams, but there's 8 of them. It's Toronto and Seattle. We got a team called the Ohio Players. We got the Florida Marlins. We got 4 expansion teams in the Mountain Time Zone. We got Arizona. We got the Colorado Rockies. We got Las Vegas. We got Portland. That's a lot of mouths to feed, all looking in the same spot, the extra player sheets. Next player is Rorik Harrison. Oh boy. Wish we could have used this card more. I feel like this is one of the most underused cards. The 72 Harrison card with Baltimore. It was awesome. 39 games with Baltimore, 94 innings, a 108 whip. And he has the 3rd lowest ERA on that Baltimore team, 72. Let's take a peek at this. Must take a look. The Baltimore pitching staff is 72. They were 80 and 74 because their hitting was pathetic. But look at these pitchers, folks. This is like dead ball 68 pitching in the 70s. Palmer 207. Eddie Watt 217. And Rorik Harrison 230. Then Doyle Alexander. All those guys were better than Dave McNally, Mike Cuellar, Pat Dobson, Grant Jackson. My gosh, they're all great pitchers from that 72 season. Completely wasted because the Orioles hit 229 and were 11th of 12 teams that hitting that year. Just horrible offense. And that was the end of the dynasty of the Orioles from 69 to 71. So, going back to Harrison, he's never going to do that again. But he is going to be an innings eater. He's going to pitch a chunk of innings for Atlanta and then Cleveland. And he'll have okay results. I mean, you could waive the dude if you wanted to, but you need bodies. Let's just keep him. I mean, lower expectations, of course. We'll keep Rorik Harrison just to have somebody, you know. And then Phil Hennigan. Here's another guy I think who we have to say goodbye to. It's never pretty to put these expansion teams to bed, I tell you, because they're going to lose. They generally lose a lot of guys. Here's Hennigan. This was the card we played. It was a fun card. 267 earned run average. A 106 whip. I mean, finding these guys, like finding a needle in the haystack, and Toronto did a great job of putting them all together on the same team at the same time. 67 innings, a 106 ERA. In 73, 43 innings for the Mets, not very good ones. Can we get the guy waivers for the Mets? Probably not. I don't recall seeing that card for the Mets, 73. And when I say I don't recall seeing that card, I'm talking, of course, here about the first edition. In the reissue, they print many more extra players. So some of these cards you'll see in the reissues when they have 27, 28, 29 cards per team. Here's the Mets looking for Phil Hennigan. Not there. And not there. And frankly, if you're the Mets, you don't, being a team that went to that World Series, you don't want to see the Phil Hennigan card if the ERA is that bad. So we'll have to retire him as well. And that's what you get. 4 guys you can keep, barely. 4 guys who are out of baseball altogether, and now you've got to make some trades in the off season to find waiver eligible players. This is always the danger of teams who have to retire so many players that you might have too many retirees, and that means your waiver list won't have a full complement of 64 players. So the goal is to have 4 keepers, 2 waivers, and 2 retires for all teams. So we still have till next March of 2025 to sort this all out. So this is just the first blush. That's it. Hope you've enjoyed the Toronto Blue Jays. 2 years having fun with this expansion process. Thanks for checking this out, and we'll see you next time.